Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Anthony Metivier, where he tells us why print media is easier to recall than digital media, as well as explain the phenomenon behind the Kennedy effect. Keep it right here. Part 2 is coming at you.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performance Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Thor Conklin here. We give you the tricks, the tips, the tools, the strategy, the technology, and the psychology peak performers use in order to get more done and execute at the highest level. If you know what to do but struggle with getting it all done, or simply want to raise your game to the next level, this podcast is for you. Sit back and enjoy. You know, I'm very visual, so when I was younger, I would study for a test. I'd actually look at the pages, look at my notes, and then when I went in for the test, I could actually recall my handwriting. I actually was better if I wrote it down and with a pen versus typed. For some reason, it seemed to be easier to recall, maybe because it was specific, a little bit different. If you've ever seen my handwriting, I miss my calling as a doctor. I'll work with clients and they're like, I'm sure what you just put up there is really good. I just have no idea what that says.
Well, I'd venture that it's visual plus kinesthetic because handwriting is a physical activity. So you maybe had the benefit of there are, I think, something like 160 muscles involved in handwriting, and all of those connect with the brain. So it's just opening up so much of your brain to have all these floodways and pathways just totally connected to that information. So it'd be, I would imagine that it's visual plus kinesthetic.
Interesting. I've always heard that writing out your goals longhand versus typing them always had a better response in your subconscious mind and making those goals come to fruition. I don't know if there's any science behind that, but it sounds like there's a connection when you actually are writing. I didn't realize there was 160 muscles in handwriting. I think I'm missing about 150 of them.
Well, I mean, the science for this is known already, and it's constantly emerging. So many years ago, well, not that many years ago, it feels more to me because I'm getting older, but Richard Weissman wrote a book called 59 Seconds, and he makes the case based on scientific studies about why that handwriting has an effect that typing doesn't when it comes to self-development, things like journaling. And that's very, very compelling research there. In the years since, someone named Stephen Conklin has written a book called The Case for Mental Imagery. It's very, very scientific, heavy-duty reading, and well worth it if you're interested in these things. But what I will just try to explain as clearly as possible is that it seems that in the brain there is almost a correspondence at a one-to-one level, or that wouldn't be the right way to describe it, but a kind of one-to-one correspondence between where things are located in the world and where the brain represents them. And it's really hard to explain this. It's kind of like a matrix thing where it's all happening in your brain and recreated in your brain, and the external world is very different than what you see and so forth, but it has to do with space. So when you're typing and you're doing all your goals and you're typing it into a text file or a Kindle, or it's not a Kindle, but something on your iPhone or whatever, where is that? Is it on page 15? Is it halfway through your journal or whatever? Your brain doesn't know where it is. But when you have it in a journal, it actually is mapped out in space. And so the most recent science about this tells us, and this is why the memory palace technique works as well, is that the brain understands things spatially. And if it knows where in space it is, such as in a journal, and it has so many centimeters on a page, it's going to understand it better. It's going to absorb it better. It's going to recall it better, and you're going to action on it better. That's the theory, and I think the theory is well substantiated in the scientific literature. And as you mentioned, I think a lot of people get more benefit out of journaling by hand, and it's not woo-woo, it's not fantasy, it's not some, people railing against technology. It's just how the brain works, and I think that we're going to see it more and more and more. So they always say that, readers are leaders or leaders are readers, but we're going to see, I think, that journalers by hand are also part of a special a tribe of achievers because of the benefits for the brain if they can hold on to that seemingly ancient tradition of handwriting.
We're going to have to come up with a good rhyme for that. Journal by hand. You're the man. Something.
Writers are fighters. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But, it's interesting because if I think about it, I can literally turn around. I've got a bookcase behind me that actually has books. And even without looking, I can recall some of these books and some of the things, the notes that I wrote in those books. But if I think about a Kindle book or an audio book, there's nothing that really comes to mind. There's no recall as much as the written, the physical book. Now, again, I don't know if that's something because I've got a good visual memory about it, but I can certainly see how that applies. So, look, we're certainly not moving that in that direction. What's in store for us? What are we going to do as humans since everything's going digital?
Well, I don't know that we're going as digital as is claimed. Here's a test of my memory. I think the author is named David Sachs, and he wrote a book called Revenge of Analog. And this talks about why vinyl comes back. Like, why? Why would vinyl ever come back? And it's just the strangest thing. And yet, and it's not like a massive explosion. Let's not exaggerate it. But it's got a hold that just won't go. And now cassettes are back. I mean, I was just blown away that I was at a store. Yes, cassettes are back. And like, why is this? And, Michael Hyatt, I really dig his stuff a lot. He has a leader box program now. He sends you 2 physical books. Each book comes with a journal, and I signed up for the program because I want to become a better leader in my business. And I was partly just curious about what the heck he's doing here. And he's not the only one. And physical newsletters, I receive physical newsletters from certain entrepreneurs, and I'm much more likely to read them than I am a blog post. And I'm much more likely to take action on them because print has presence. It's much more likely to get consumed in a meaningful way that is away from a digital amnesia environment, and it's much more likely to have your attention. So, and I implemented this in my own business. I now have a physical book that's available only with a print newsletter, and it's been astonishing the results that it gets for people simply because it's not something that's buried in the middle of their computer that is just going to be forgotten. This thing shows up at your door, and it's got more exercises. It's designed to say, oh yeah, and by the way, this is on page 150 of the Memory Connection, which is the book that comes with the newsletter. And I see people sending their photos now. I'm not throwing away the digital. There's a secret Facebook group they can participate in. They're sending their photos now. They're actually, much more people are drawing the memory palaces as I teach to get those parts of the brain activated so that they actually can use the memory palaces at a much higher level than they would if they just imagined them without getting it on paper. And it's just incredible. It's not for everybody, but for the people that it's for, they tell me in the surveys that they're attracted to it for the same reason that I predicted and did my research on. And I did a lot of research before I decided to get hooked up with the ins and outs of a physical fulfillment thing, because it's not easy. But I knew that this was a hurt that was out there. I knew I could solve it, and I saw other entrepreneurs doing it, and I just thought, I have to try this. And it's been successful enough to keep it growing. And once you are in it and you see it, you can see how scalable it is. But it's helping people, and it's helping those people who have exactly the digital amnesia problem that is keeping so many people back, because the brain's just not designed for it. Well, at least some brains aren't.
One of the things that I loved that you said before, which really stood out to me because I had not heard this before, was as you fire and wire together, that you're forming multiple connections. And I immediately started to think about the work that I do with entrepreneurs that, there's a problem that we're trying to overcome. Well, we can take one route to try to fix that, but there's probably multiple routes. And generally, there's an unlimited number of solutions to something. And if we just keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, we're not getting the results, or we're not making that connection. What I love is what you're talking about is making multiple connections, so there's multiple ways to get back to that memory. The more channels or the more routes that we have, the deeper that connection is. I think back to 9/11 and a very strong emotional event for most everyone on the planet. It was certainly a very strong emotional event for me. And I remember things about that day and what happened. Like, I can't tell you what happened on the 10th of September 2001, but certainly on September 11th. So that emotional connection plays a big piece in our recollection, I guess.
Yes, the great mnemonist, that's the fancy word for people who are obsessed with memory techniques and make it a part of their lives. His name was David Burglas. In 1988, he released a book called A Question of Memory. And in it, he talks about the Kennedy effect. And he said, why is it that people can just rattle off exactly what they were doing, what they were eating for breakfast the day Kennedy died, right? And you mentioned, now we would call it the 9/11 effect, perhaps. And before that, we might have called it the Lincoln effect. And the reason is that because of the chemicals that the brain produces at the shock of the event, all things are firing at once, and then all things are wiring at once. And so Burglas asks, how can we engineer everything that we want to remember so that it has the Kennedy effect, but without any of the negative associations and without any of the having to think of depressing things in order to remember anything? And so that is certainly something that has been known, and war, of course, has been so memorable that we have the problem of post trauma and shell shock, as they called it 100 years ago. And it really is true. You can engineer these kinds of epic events in your mind without the damage. And you can do it in ways, as you're mentioning, that don't necessarily have to do with what you want to remember, but just what you want to get done, so that you have this little engine of discipline that keeps you motivated and keeps you going towards your goals and having milestones between the goals. So this is about more than memory. It's about making connections that serve you and keep you moving, so that when dips come, because dips come, you still have a clear path, because you're connected in so many ways, and you just get back up on that horse. It's inevitable. You can create systems and rituals and procedures that just make getting back up on the horse inevitable.
If you're not getting the results you want and need, I guarantee no one's holding you accountable. Now, let's face it, who really wants to be held accountable? Not me, right? Nobody. Why would you want to be held accountable? It's not part of our nature. However, if you want to get exceptional results, you must be held accountable. For $95 a month, our team will hold you accountable to those goals that you want to accomplish in any given month. If you don't like it, ask for your money back. But truly, if you're not getting the results, it's because no one's holding you accountable. The only question is, are you willing to step up?
Keep an eye out for part 3 of our interview with Dr. Anthony, where he tells us how to tailor your diet to give you the best results physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And Dr. Anthony also tells us whether positive or negative emotions make a bigger impact on memory. See you next time on Peak Performers Podcast.